Hello, I'm Myra Stammberger. Here we are again, continuing the series of videos about the Wisdom Project. We already had 4 videos on the strategy or methodology that we follow at the Wisdom Project that I call Wisdom by Design, the idea that we can design our personal life, the life of our family, our workplace, and our community. We can design it for wisdom using tools developed by the sages of the past or developed by current researchers in the area of the mind, using those tools that I call them Mindware, because we wear them in the mind, to grow in wisdom and confront the many challenges of today's world. So the first series of the videos then was about the strategy or methodology, Wisdom by Design. And the second series of videos was with the method. Okay, this is the methodology, but how do you do that? So the method is called the REAL method, real method, and it means ritual, creating rituals, engagement with artifacts, man-made things to pursue the liminal, to pursue transitions in understanding. Ritual engagement with artifacts in pursuit of the liminal, in pursuit of transformation, in pursuit of new understandings. So those 2 series of videos now are going to be complemented with this one that I'm starting with my 2 friends, Nicola and Pierce, and we're going to be covering Mindware, how it is that, what type of tools we are going to use to cultivate wisdom, tools for the mind. And so before I start, I want to invite Nicola and Pierce to introduce themselves to the listeners. Go ahead, Nicola.
Hi, my name is Nikola Semyonov. I'm from Sofia, Bulgaria. And, well, as professionally, I studied applied mathematics and I worked the last 10 years developing some software simulating oil recovery. And the last couple of years, I've been introduced to this little corner of the internet, and I started delving into wisdom practices, reading books, listening to podcasts, and this is what brought me here. And this is how I met Iris and did her Wisdom Project Fundamental course.
Okay, thanks. And you, Pierce?
I'm Pierce Westlink. I'm from Northwest Arkansas, and professionally, again, had a career in mechanical design and engineering. Recently been in a transition where I'm starting my own company and in that space, and also in this wisdom space as a mindfulness teacher. And like Nicola, a few years ago, had gotten involved in a bunch of podcasts, one of them being, Awakening from the Meaning Crisis from John Vervaeke. And that led me down this rabbit hole and ended up taking the Wisdom Project with Iris. The end is in December of last year. So I'm happy to be here and participate in this. Thank you.
And I'm grateful that you are here to help me explicate a little more what is that I'm trying to do with the Wisdom Project. As I said, the mission is to democratize wisdom, to bring it to the general public and not keep talking about this little corner of the internet or going through this rabbit hole. How do we make this thing a cultural thing? And as you mentioned, John Vervaeke, I am deeply indebted to him, and the work that I do in the Wisdom Project is deeply indebted to him. And his mission too is to bring this into the world. I think he says taking over the culture or something like that. John Vervaeke is a professor of cognitive science, the director of the department or the Center of Cognitive Science at the University of Toronto in Canada. And he has a very well-known video series, Awakening from the Meaning Crisis, which has been inspirational to the three of us and to many other people. My goal is to make this knowledge accessible to many. And that's the purpose of the Wisdom Project. That's why all the materials are licensed under the Creative Commons license, meaning that people can use the materials. And what I only ask of people is that mention that they learn a particular thing from me. It's a new type of license that I think is very necessary these days. So today we're going to be talking, as I said, about the Mindware, the tools for the mind, and how to use certain tools to cultivate wisdom. The term Mindware comes from, there are three psychologists that I know of that have written books called Mindware. My favorite psychologist, he's a philosopher. He's a philosopher of mind, Andy Clark, that says that who we are and what we do in the world is because we have all these mindware available to us, like language, like numeracy, like being a mathematician, like Nicola, or an engineer like Pierce, or an engineer and psychologist like myself. So we equipped ourselves with things that make us how we see ourselves and how we see the world. That's Mindware. But before Andy Clark wrote his book on Mindware, another psychologist called David Perkins, who works in the educational field, he also presented that concept. What is a mindware that we want people to have accessible to them so they can keep cultivating themselves throughout life beyond schooling? And another psychologist called Richard Nisbet wrote another book with the same name, and he's just using a lot of examples of the tools we use to make decisions. And you as an abstract mathematician, Nicola, and you as an engineer, Pierce, you know that the work that engineers do is done with the help of Mindware. We couldn't do the analysis, present the reports, design the things that we do without all the Mindware available to us that we spent years developing, and that it seems that it's never enough because there are always innovations. So we are enmeshed and embedded and entangled into this mindware that constitutes at the end the mind that we are. And I don't know if you have noticed on yourself, but I do have noticed on myself that many times I tend to think as an engineer because that was my first career. So I like to take a problem, capture it, and then split it in little pieces and start solving it. And many times, and the problems that require wisdom are not like that. So I have to catch myself in the act continuously of trying to follow the engineering path, of trying to use the mindware of the engineer to address the complexity of the problems of today, which are the problems that require that we develop wisdom, that we reason wisely. So, any comments or questions about that?
I'm guessing you're talking about those wicked problems that are hard to define and the solution is not straightforward. And the mindful tools, are you saying that they help us?
Louder, can you speak a little louder?
Are you saying that the mindful tools help us approach those problems with more humility, so then we can apply the structured engineering approach afterwards?
Okay, I didn't catch. It's raining very, very strongly here. We have a storm in Boston. So if you can speak a little louder, because I didn't catch the last part of your question.
I'm sorry. I was asking that with the mindful approach, I think you're saying we can approach those wicked problems with more humility. So afterwards, we can apply all the structured engineering approaches that we also have at
Yes.
our availability.
Yes, because it's not about discarding our training, our engineering training, it's adding tools, adding mindware to our toolkit. And thank you for bringing the concept of wicked problems, because that's the definition of the problems that require wisdom. If it's an engineering problem, it could be very complicated, like putting a rocket in the moon. It's very complicated, but you can slice that problem in a bunch of tasks and organize the manufacturing of the rocket in parallel path, and you can do many things, but it's kind of a very linear process. Instead, when you are dealing with a wicked problem like climate change or social isolation, what happens is that as soon as you start working the problem, as soon as you frame the problem in a certain way and you start working towards solving it, then you discover something new. So you have to stop and be, as you said, Nicola, humble to start anew and try to frame the problem differently. That's what requires reasoning wisely, that the problem is wicked. And the good or bad thing is that we all have wicked problems in our lives. And I like to use the example of my mother-in-law, who is a wonderful woman, but it requires both of her part and my part that we reframe continuously a particular challenge that we have, because keeping a good relationship, and mainly because it's long distance, because she's in another country and we don't see each other as often as we would like, requires that we reason wisely every time there is a misunderstanding. So something as simple as the relationship with a dear person in your life, or as complex as climate change, requires wise reasoning, because they are wicked problems. You want to add something, Pierce?
Yeah, I feel that that breaking of frame is such an instrumental part of this, of what we're talking about, and the tendency for everyone to get locked into, or individuals to get locked into a specific way of looking at things, whether it's whether you're trying to solve an engineering problem, or trying to have a relationship, or having conflict in your relationship, that locked into one way of viewing things and not being able to break that frame is like such a fundamental thing. And I think that at this point, we're in culture, we just have forgotten how to do that. And that's where I think that, like, where we're talking about the mind tools and applying these things to not only like here is so important, in bringing it, expanding it deeper into everything that we do. So
it is difficult to break the grip, because as another psychologist have said, the brain is a cognitive miser. It's very cheap, doesn't want to spend energy in what doesn't need to be expended. If the brain saw that a woman with long hair and glasses and an accent is a nice lady, when the brain was a little child, the brain would keep repeating that experience forever. That's why invest the energy. So that's okay. If we eat beets, many people don't like beets, and the first time we ate them, we didn't like them. That's it. We made a decision. We are going to hate beets for the rest of our lives. But these type of wicked problems that require continuous reframing, and continuous, what John Vervaeke calls transframing, meaning you change how you define the problem, but also in doing that, you change how you define yourself. You are not any longer the hater of beets. You learn that you hated them when you were 5 years old, but now that you are 35, you have a more complicated palate. Oh my goodness, this is delicious, you see? So transframing, and that's the task of we pursuers of the cultivation of wisdom. And Nicola mentioned something very important is mindfulness, to be mindful. Because in the moment that we are mindful, we invite ourselves, we invite our brain to stop and rethink the previous assumption. And that's the secret of all the methods that I know of for the cultivation of wisdom. Stop and think. We learned about the story of Jesus Christ, when he went to the desert. He was tempted by ideas, but he decided he wanted to do something different. And he spent 40 days in the desert, cultivating a new way of being in the world. We know the story of Gautama, the Buddha, the prince, mentioned in Sages of the Past, who was living in a very leisured life and decided to leave the palace and then practice and practice. And the story goes that one day he said, okay, I'm going to sit under this tree and I'm not going to stand until I get enlightened, until I get this transframing experience that I'm looking for. And so he did it. And the benefit that we have today is that we have all those experiences and techniques and mind tools that they created for us, but we also have all the mind tools that psychologists have been creating now since, perhaps for 100 years, that can help us break those frames. And that's what we try to do in this process of trying to democratize wisdom through choosing projects that are wicked, that are going to force us to stop and think before we continue solving it. Comments about that?
I agree with everything you've said, but I just feel it's important to mention that the other thing is also quite important. Because when you start breaking frames and see that nothing is certain, there is the tendency of drowning in uncertainty and not willing to take any action. So it's really important to realize the paradox that both are true. Nothing is certain, but still you need to take the next step. And this is why I feel your approach of one project at a time is really important. So it keeps you focused instead of going down in nihilism.
Yes. Thank you for bringing that to the forefront. Yes. Basically, the motto of the Wisdom Project is changing our world one project at a time. So I choose as a project to establish a better relationship with my sister. And this is a real example too. And I remember telling my brother-in-law, you see, I'm going to change because my sister and I, it's a lifelong story of, love and confrontation. And I said, I promise I'm going to be using this particular mind tool and we're going to change the relationship. And I did it. But having done that, I knew I could use the same tool for another issue. So one project at a time, because that builds confidence. It's like I cannot become in a second the best chef that exists. I just have to cook the best cake once and then do another cake. And when I become more or less familiar with how cakes need to be done, then I said, okay, I'm going to alter a little the proportion of the ingredients and I'm going to bake a tart. And then that's how you do it until you become a good pastry chef. That's the idea, one project at a time. Thank you for bringing that to the surface. But going back to the mindfulness, to the stop and think, for years, for 2,500 years, we have known that this guy named Buddha and the people who practice Buddhism they have a particular tool, a particular approach to develop what they call enlightenment. That in my book is the ability to gain aha moments and basically the ability to frame and transframe and reframe as many times as you want anything that happens in your to touch your experience. But we never thought of bringing that into the world. I have been a mindfulness teacher for more than 20 years, and I have been doing a particular type of meditation called Vipassana, which means insight, but I never, until now that I'm doing the Wisdom Project, never brought it to the world. And what is the benefit of mindfulness and stopping us is that according to current understanding in psychology, we have two systems of making decisions. One, and this is proposed by Daniel Kahneman, who is a Nobel Prize winning psychologist. He said one system is the automatic pilot, that we just do things because we do things. If I need to wake up and go to the bathroom at midnight, I don't have to think, okay, now I have to see it. No, we just do it. We have sleep and we still go and use the bathroom. And the same when we wake up and we go to the kitchen to prepare coffee. There is an automatic pilot. I don't need to learn every day how to dress myself, how to prepare coffee, and how to go out and drive my car to my workplace. But sometimes we need to be reflective when we decide to, again, using the example of baking, to bake a new cake. We have to stop and then reflect. So those two systems, he called them S1 and S2, are operating in us all the time, and which is great because we don't have to start thinking again how it is that we drive, how it is that we prepare coffee, how it is that we dress ourselves, how it is that we brush our teeth. We do it automatically. But when confronted with wicked problems where we need to transform, to reframe, and perhaps even transframe, meaning transform ourselves, mindfulness helps. Mindfulness techniques, such as two techniques that we practice at the Wisdom Project, awareness of breath and the body scan that we will explain in future sessions, are very, very helpful. Any comments?
I would mention that it aligns perfectly with what I was reading recently from Ian McGilchrist about.
Okay, so you have to speak a little louder, Nicola. I don't know, my computer has all the volume and I still, could you hear him, Pierce? Okay.
I can hear him okay.
Only okay, but remember, this is for people to listen to it in YouTube, and they're going to be listening on their phones, so.
Okay now?
Yes, that's better, Nicola.
Okay, so what I was saying is that what you were just saying perfectly aligns with what I've been reading from Ian McGilchrist on the left and right hemispheres of the brain, how the left part of the brain tends to specialize with known things, and we as a society are drifting towards the left hemisphere. And the tools you are mentioning help us get back to the right hemisphere, which has the holistic view. So we are actually able to change frame and get to this all moments.
Yeah, this view that he is espousing has been criticized by many, that there is no such a big difference between the right and the brain side of the brain, but it has been very popular. I cannot say which one is correct, but that could be applied. The one that is more recognized, and he won a Nobel Prize because of it, a Nobel Prize in economics. He's a psychologist, but it was in economics because that concept of automatic piloting thinking versus reflective has proven that many people in economics and in the financial field led themselves to make bad decisions because they let S1 or automatic pilot thinking take relevance when the problems are wicked and they need to stop and reflect. but could be, I know Ian is very popular, but I know that there are many challenges to that idea of the left and brain brain specialization. Would you like to add something, Piers?
When one thing that comes to mind on this topic is just the idea of mindfulness. To me, helps the modal shift from the doing mode to the being mode. Like it gives us that space to like sit and just let it be, and then just practice and play with our consciousness for a while to help to build that focus. And like Rick Rapetti is one of the people that kind of gave me this kind of concept of playing with your consciousness, and the idea that there's so many ways to do it, like not the mindfulness, Vipassana, and then there's all sorts of practices that are available to people. But again, it's just, there's an element to that that's like, it's a little bit difficult to decide, okay, what works for me, because there's so many ideas out there. I think kind of just like what happened just now with Nicola and you, and about Ian McGilchrist there, like there's so many ideas of like, you can do this to be better, or to do better in life. You can do this, especially if you're somebody that's like on YouTube. So like, I feel like that this is maybe one of those wicked problems where like our attention is being always being grabbed away, and like mindfulness is kind of an answer to that attention grabbingness of our culture now. So
that's also why I like the idea of the toolkit, the metaphor of having many tools, and you choose the tool that is more appropriate for you at the particular moment, instead of saying, you have to practice this particular technique, or you have to rely on this. Because I agree, Rick Rapetti is also a friend of the Wisdom Project, and he also came to the Wisdom Project and recommends participants for the Wisdom Project. He's a professor of philosophy at the New York State University, the University of New York. And he's a meditation teacher and author of meditation books. And yes, there are many ways of stop and think, if you can call it in a very simple way. Just stop and think it anew. The brain is a cognitive miser, doesn't want to review a decision that was made in the past. But if you stop and think, perhaps you are going to open yourself to a new way of approaching things. So how do we put these ideas in practice in the Wisdom Project? So I follow a model of wisdom that was created in 2020 by 10 psychologists, 10 empirical psychologists, one of which is John Vervaeke, of course, but other psychologists like Monica Ardelt have presented models of wisdom, and they all got together under the invitation of Igor Grossman, a professor of the University of Waterloo, a social psychologist of the University of Waterloo, who said, let's just get together, we do empirical research on wisdom, and try to agree, because there are as many models as researchers. And they worked, I think it was, it took them 2 years. They did a global survey of research, of wisdom researchers, and they came out with 4 elements that characterize all the models of wisdom they use. And so in the Wisdom Project, it's called the Common Wisdom Model. The Common Wisdom Model. And in the Common Wisdom Model, there are 4 elements, 4 aspects that you have to cultivate. Those 4 aspects, and I have to use a big word, because that's their word, they conformed what they have called perspectival metacognition. Perspectival metacognition. What is perspectival metacognition? Well, cognition is how we learn, how we memorize, how we solve problems. We use the term cognition to refer to those very mental functions of our mind, cognition. Metacognition is the ability to observe how it is that we do those things. Oh, I have a tendency to learn better in the morning or at night, or I have a tendency to problem solve like an engineer, not as like a psychologist. So we meta ourselves, we observe ourselves. That's metacognition. And it's a very well studied, it's an empirically solid concept that has been studied, or like, educators study how students develop metacognition throughout their X number of years in school. And this type of metacognition, perspectival metacognition, refers, according to these 10 psychologists, to our ability of taking different perspectives as we go through the process of metacognition. Example, Iris knows and catches herself in the act over and over and over, thinking like an engineer, even though perhaps the problem she's tackling is a wicked problem, a complex problem that she cannot frame and split in little pieces and solve throughout, 6 months project management methodology. But she catches herself in the act of going back to that perspective, the perspective of the engineer. So perspectival metacognition, the ability to identify different perspectives, according to these psychologists, has 4 elements, 4 aspects, they say. One is the balance of point of view, meaning that I can see myself taking a point of view and my other self, me, the psychologist, taking a point of view, me, the psychologist of wicked problems, taking a point of view, and me, the engineer, taking a point of view. And I can honor, respect, and even smile when I see me doing it again. Balance of point of view. The second aspect, Nicola already mentioned it a while ago, intellectual humility. The ability to say, okay, I know a lot, but perhaps I don't know everything. Perhaps I need to stop and review what I think I know. The third aspect is acceptance of different perspectives. And it's obvious from what I have been saying. And the other one is adapting to the context of the situation. So not thinking that, let's say, because I want to think both as a psychologist, as an engineer, I need to apply these perspectives when I am solving a problem, an emergency with my mom. You see, so being able to adapt my thinking, my acting, my feeling to the particular situation. So these 4 aspects of perspectival metacognition are crucial in the way that I approach the design of the exercises and the experiences in the Wisdom Project, because I want to cultivate those 4 aspects as they represent perspectival metacognition. That is what, according to this common wisdom model, is what characterizes wisdom. I find myself always a little reluctant to use these big psychological, words or concepts, but sometimes I think it's important. And, for you that, you experience the 7 weeks of the Wisdom Project Fundamentals course, and I never speak about this, but what holds it together is what I just said. So now that I know that I want to develop perspectival metacognition. How do I do that? How do I get to develop it in only 2 hours, 7 times? It's kind of a big challenge, huh? Fortunately, I have been a management consultant for many years and a meditation teacher for many, many years. And I know, and I agree, Verviki says it in his video series, by choosing exercises, by choosing Mindware that does either of these two things, decentering, taking you out of your center, therefore pushing you to have another perspective, and we already said it, de-automation, meaning stop and think. So in those 2 hours that you experienced with me and other people 7 times during the Wisdom Project training, everything was designed to give people the opportunity to develop perspectival metacognition by choosing techniques where people are invited to decenter and de-automate. Any comments?
Those principles apply extremely well in situations with wicked problems like dealing with a spouse or with your daughter or with a family member. Because if you manage to break away from reactivity and observe yourself, you started not noticing your own patterns that you've been doing over and over again. And after this first step of noticing, then you can start playing with acting differently and actually realizing that your perspective on the subject matter is actually not the right one. So they have changed my life for the better. But I believe they need continuous work, and because at some point you can lose the humbleness and start thinking, okay, now I got it. So they need practicing. They are not something that you learn once and you're done.
Yeah, I resonate with that a lot, Nicola. I think I recently attended a retreat with the Respond Network, and that experience like really kind of brought me back into my body in a lot of ways, and like kind of reconnected things. And coming home from that and dealing with life, the normal things of life, like you said, just an argument with your wife, or struggles with your children or whatever, and like being these practices are life-changing, and in the same breath have to be continually practiced and like kind of honed in a way, because they like one of the points I think that the Respond wants to bring out is that like practices have failure modes if they're not balanced with other mind tools, because we can become locked into one way of looking at things, like Iris is saying, just de-automating, but like our tendency as humans is to kind of like automate things into this normal way of doing things, and being able to like one, kind of notice that, and then when you do notice it, knowing, oh, what do I do? So like that, I think that may be like one place I want to dive deeper into, is like once you've kind of cultivated this noticing, where do you go from there? And I think that's kind of I feel like that's a point where you're, as a practitioner or somebody that's interested in wisdom, I feel like sometimes you're going to hit that point a lot in the journey, because you're going to get I feel like you're going to run into your roadblocks or dead ends and have to be like, where did I go wrong? And anyway, so.
Well, I like calling it parenting yourself. So having the intellectual humility to say that you don't know anymore, that you hit a wall, and at the same time treating yourself with care and compassion and love like a parent, to soothe yourself until you get the energy to continue using the mind tools, or perhaps changing the mindware, whatever we want to call them. So I think we have completed the hour. So I thank you. And if you want to add one before I stop the recording, a comment about this experience, and then I stop the recording, and we will have some time to the three of us to summarize the experience before next time.
I don't know. I just want to reiterate the importance of those tools that you're talking about. So an example comes to mind from the book you recommended, Iris, Dopamine Nation. I just finished it, about how sometimes one can actually reframe, see the addiction, and then get addicted to the thing that was helping him to get rid of the addiction. So the continuity of those practices is of utmost importance. This was the point I wanted to make.
The awareness that comes from noticing how you repeat the patterns, how you have developed what we called a personality. And even though you confront yourself to challenge yourself not to do it, you find yourself again going back to it. That's why parenting, the idea of parenting is perfect, because when you observe your own limitations, instead of blaming your inability to reach, the higher levels of humanhood or personhood, you just, soothe yourself, ask yourself to take a little break, and then invite yourself to continue. Pierce, you want to add something before we close?
I love the metaphor that you used of parenting, because it is such a good reminder of the gentleness and like friendship and love that should be given to yourself as well as others around you. And so thank you for that, and I just appreciate being part of this, and am excited to continue.
We will continue. We will then transition to other aspects of the Wisdom Project and how it is that we implement the common wisdom model in our training.